Is it okay to actually read the Bible in Sunday school? Because listen, God begins to answer Job. In the book of Job, over there about chapter 38, you find the most amazing words that could ever be written in a book. Job said this, "Oh, that my words were written in a book." And here his words are written in a book. Not only that, but God's response to his friends and himself are written and recorded in a book. When God begins to explain to Job what's going on, the first thing God does is just absolutely lay out everything that Job has no knowledge of. Job has no understanding of. Job doesn't realize that God establishes the order. I think Job knows that, but the extent of it, God has to explain to him, where were you at when I did this? Where were you at when I did that? Where were you at? Explain to me, Job, how I did this. Would you please do that? And he in doing it, he actually uncovers an order. God reveals a part of him in Job when he starts speaking that we never would have known if God hadn't answered Job. But amazingly, he brings up things that, I told you guys this, and we're going to read it. He brings up things that science just caught up with in 1970. It took them 5,000, let's see, that would be 5,970 years to catch up with God. He's going to bring that up. The springs in the sea. You know, we just discovered that when we were drilling for oil. We found out in, I believe it was about 1970, that there were freshwater springs in the ocean. I'm talking about people who have been shipwrecked, floating in the ocean, drinking the water, should have died and lived, and nobody believed their story that there was fresh water until 1970. Isn't that something? Found freshwater springs, that the Gulf Stream. It exists, y'all. There's springs that come up, fresh water is being fed into the ocean. But yet the book of Job, well, let's turn there. We're going to start in the book of Job. There's so much ground to cover. Turn to Job chapter number 38. Now, I'm not going to read 38, 39, 40, and so on, but I just want to give you a clip of God telling Job, look, I did this and I established order, and everything he does, he creates, he establishes an order. Now, you think about it. You think about even our planting. The things we do every year. There's some corn back there. Y'all help yourself to it. But if there wasn't an order of God's creation, we couldn't have that. Do you know He has messengers that bring pollen from one location to another location and sprinkle that thing there, not even realizing that that's their purpose. God created them. They just realize, hey, I just got to feed myself. I got to feed my family. I got to take care of my hive. And in process of taking care of themselves and their hive, the whole time, they're also feeding us. You ever think about that? Little things. They call it symbiotic relationships. To me, one of the strongest evidence in science, if you want to, I know it's a big word, y'all. I like science. You'll have to pardon it for a minute. But if you look at the symbiotic relationships in science, they point to an amazing God. Things that have to happen at the same time that help each other, that don't even realize that they're helping each other. But you see that all the time. That little I'm amazed. I can't remember what it's called. The name is just escaping me. A moray or something like that. A little black thing that's on the side of the shark that you see it, and it's like, why don't the shark eat it? That thing is up by his face sometimes. Chomp on it. But that thing is doing the shark a favor. That thing is keeping all of that trash off of the shark, those leeches, all that other stuff that would hurt that shark, and that shark has recognized that. Symbiotic relationships. It's amazing, isn't it? But God has order. God has order. Job 38. Job 38. We'll read this one, and if you want to really get an amazing glimpse of the order of God, go ahead and read the other chapters. I just want to give a snapshot. I want to give a snapshot of when God answers Job. Look at verse number 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge. You know what he's telling Job? Look here, let me teach you something. Let me tell you something about the order of the universe, the order of your planet that I put you on. Let me tell you what I did. Let me show you how I set it in order. Gird up now thy loins like a man, and I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where was thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? See the order? Declare if thou hast understanding. Where were you at, Job? When I laid the foundation of the earth and I set the foundation so that I can build the rest of it, where were you at? Who has laid the measures thereof? How much? Tell me, Job, how big is it? You tell me how big it is. Tell me how big the dimensions are. Tell me how big the core is. Tell me how big the gravitational field is, Job. Could you measure that for me? It's amazing. God is laying Himself transparent here. The order that He created, He knows. He knows the measurements. He knows the distance from the sun that it had to be to bring life. He knows the distance from the moon that it had to bring to sustain tides. He knew all of that. He set all of that in order. And I'm telling you, if you get it out of order, this is why I know the earth isn't millions of years old. Because if you calculate just 100,000 years back, we would be too close to the sun. Do you know the sun is actually burning off? We are losing the sun. You go back 100,000 years, we are so close at the rate it's been burning. People say the rate can change. Okay, I'll give you that. But we would have been so close to the sun, the earth would have been burned up. You can't go back but so far. You back calculate the rate, it's burning off now. You know that, right? The sun burns off. It's burning off. They have ways of measuring that. I mean, it's a burning, anyway. It's amazing. It's amazing. People don't stop and think there is an order to what God created. And that's why I encourage you to look up that on YouTube, that Privileged Planet. It talks about a lot of those examples. It'll blow your mind what God did and how He did it and how precise He was in doing it, and set it in order in such a way that not only would it breed life, but it would sustain life. You have to admit this. It's sustained life a long time. His order always works. Always works. Solar flares, right. Sure. It's amazing. You look at the magnetic... I'm going to get on rabbit trails because I love this kind of stuff. You look at the magnetic pull of the moon, and you look at... They try to make our solar system... It really does appear to be a closed system to me. I don't want to sit here and argue with all this, but I've heard all the arguments. I listen to debates. I like listening to debates on all of it, and creation, evolution debates, and all. I just like listening to it because you should be able to defend your faith. You should be able to stand for your faith. You should have examples that you can help. The more we know, I think the better off we are trying to defend our faith. And so, but it's amazing. You look at the pull of the moon. You know, look at everything the moon is involved in. It's involved in the tides. It's involved in giving light to the earth. It's involved in how animals behave. You like to hunt. You like to fish, right? Do you know what the old-timers knew that these, can I say this without being mean, these dumb young kids don't know? You plant on certain cycles, you fish on certain cycles, and you hunt on certain cycles, and it's more fruitful if you do, and you're going to get less game if you don't. That's how they knew. Listen, you look at them old timers. We got apps now, but they used to sit down and lay out maps. They had maps. I've seen them. It's amazing. They were much more intelligent than us. These old timers were much more smart than us dumb young kids. They would lay out maps. It's called a lunar calendar. Based on the position of the sun and the moon, they would pick days of the year. This is when I'm going fishing. I'm not going to work this day, I'm going fishing. I'm not going to work this day, I'm going hunting. because those were the height of the movement, the feeding cycles, and the bedding cycles of the fish. They knew all of that. You say, what is that based on? It's based on what God created. God, it shows you, all of it shows you, there is a specific order. Breeding cycles are done based on the moon. And listen, all that stuff He created is for a purpose. It's amazing. We completely are surrounded by a planet that should put us in awe and point us to a Creator, and people insist on ignoring it. Look what he says here. Verse number 5, who laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest, or who stretched the line upon it? I think about when I think of a line, I think of a chalk line. We everything we do mimics what God does. We take that chalk line and we measure certain distances, and it'll be like 4 foot down there and 4 foot over here, and we take that chalk line and pop it, and it tells us exactly where to run everything. I think about that, and I don't know if that's exactly how, God, I don't know what His line looks like, but He has one that it is order to it. It's amazing. It's amazing. It would be a good line, wouldn't it? It's just amazing. Now you just think of the order just of the globe we're on. The closer you get to that equator, it's smoking hot. This baffles me because, I talked to Bucky on the phone. Okay? It's sweltering hot here, but comfortable there. You know what I'm saying? When Manny and them were in Paraguay, I'm like, why are y'all dressed like that? It was the middle of the summer for us, and they got clothes on. I mean, like long stuff, and I'm like, what is that? Oh, well, it's opposite season. And it dawned on me, I think I did learn that in school. But there's a dividing line. I don't know how anybody couldn't see such grand order in what God's created. Look at verse number 6. Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Who had laid the cornerstones thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy, or who hath shut up the sea with doors, and when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb. See the restraint and the limitations? Look at this. And break up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors. And I said, hitherto shalt thou come no further. Here shall thy proud ways be stayed. Isn't that something? You know what God is telling Job? Go out there and look at that ocean, Job. And I want to tell you something. Go look at the sea, and I want you to look at the waves. And I want you to understand, I told it how far it could go or not go. I set the limitations. And He did. We know somewhat how He did now based on not the extent of it, but based on moon cycles, we can see it now. We didn't know any of that. It's amazing. Watch what he says here. Where are we at? 12. Hast thou commanded the morning since thy days? All right, Job. Get up. Hast thou commanded the morning since thy days? Have you told the morning to start, Job? You know what? Listen. Look at the order of your day. When do you go? I got to go to work in the morning. I get off in the afternoon. I go to bed at night. An order that you completely ignore every single day and don't appreciate that sun's coming up the next morning. And there's one person that's telling it to do that. Commanding the morning. All right, rooster, it's your time to crow. All right, little bird, start chirping. I want you to tell the world it's morning. All right, it's night. You climb up on your roost and shut up. Now it's time for the owl to start telling everybody it's night. Let him tell it. It's his turn now. Do you not see the order? It's an amazing order God set. Watch what he says here. Verse 12, hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the dayspring to know his place, that it might be take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked might be shaken out of it. It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. And from the wicked their light is withholden, and the high arm shall be broken. Hast thou entered, here, look at this, here's what I'm telling you, the discovery of these springs in the sea. Look at this. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea? Long before we ever discovered it. You didn't discover it, it already existed. They act like, Christopher Columbus discovered America. Well, wasn't it here before he got here? Wasn't there people already here? They didn't discover it? It's crazy. There's a sign that says Discover Daltall Island. I don't know if it's still there, but over in Beaufort it used to be Discover Daltall Island. I'm thinking to myself, well, ain't it already there? What's to discover? Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in the search of the depth? Have the gates of death been opened unto thee? Isn't that something? He even knows about the gates of death. Or hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? You say it's got doors? That's what God said. Have you ever seen them? Nope. And I doubt Job has either. But I promise you, we're going to see them one day. David says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we're going to see them one day. If the Lord don't come back and take us out of here before. Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare it if thou knowest it all. Where is the way where light dwelleth? As for darkness, where is the place thereof? That thou shouldest take it to the bound thereof, and that thou shouldest know the paths of the house thereof. Knowest thou it because thou wast then born? Or because the number of thy days is great? Hast thou entered into the treasure of the snow? That is amazing. You know what God says? I got a place where, you guys store up money. You got treasures for money. You got a piggy bank or something. You know what God's telling Job? I got a place where I store up snow. And we know a little more about that now. We know about the cloud systems, and we didn't know a lot of that then. But long before we ever knew, long before there was a meteorologist that knew anything about it, God said, I got treasures of snow stored up. And so you go ahead and get on your little flight. Isn't it amazing? Get on your little flight. And when you go through the clouds, you know what happens? Why? Why is there ice up there? It's almost like God already knew what was up there and wrote it long before we discovered it. There's treasures there that He knows about. Look at this. Verse 22, hast thou entered into the treasures of snow? Hast thou seen the treasures of hail? I don't know if I want to see those. But he says he has them. Which I reserve against the time of trouble and against the day of battle and war. By what way is light parted? Boy, that's something. You know what scientists have been doing recently? They've been trying to slow down light to see if they could get it to stop. The speed, the light. They've been slowing it down. Isn't that something? But God knows where it starts, and He knows where it stops. That's what we just read. And we still ain't caught up with Him. Isn't that amazing? By what way is light parted which scattered the east wind upon the earth? Who hath divided a watercourse, or the overflowing of waters, or the way of for lightning and thunder, to cause it to rain on the earth? There is where no man is, on the wilderness wherein there is no man, to satisfy the desolate and waste ground, and to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth. Hath the rain a father, or who hath begotten the drops of dew, out of whose womb came the what? The description is incredible. And the hoary frost of heaven, who hath gendered it? Isn't that something? No doubt a pretty good description of the cloud systems that he's talking about there. The waters are hid with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades? You know what he's bringing up here? Star systems. Star systems. Watch what he says here. Or loose the bands of Orion. God says, and you say, what is he talking about? Loose the bands. Do you not read in the Scriptures where it talks about the stars of heaven falling? Right? You know what God says there? Yeah, go on and look up there at Orion. You see that belt he's got? You see that band that's there? Are you able to loose it? You know what God is saying? I can. Pretty amazing. And yet we skim through this sometime. My favorite part of the book of Job is when God starts speaking. Because all the way through it, you can't make out whether is this true doctrine or not. You got to think about who's talking. You got to compare Scripture with Scripture. But when you get to the part where God starts speaking, you can take that to the bank. Watch this. He says, canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season? Canst thou guide Arturus and his sons? Speaking of constellations, it's amazing. So I teach my boys. We're out. Let me just show you the order. Let me just show you the order. It's amazing. It's amazing. The order that God has set in heaven, sailors have used it to sail the earth. Back before we had this compass thing, back before we had this fancy navigation, I'm out on the boat some nights with my boys when we've been gigging, and they'll tell you. I'll go up and say, hey, look at there. There's the Big Dipper right there. See it right there? Look at the side of its bucket. It points this way. Look at the stars right here on the side of it turned upside down. Far left of you see the handle here, and in the bucket here, you see these right here. You count 5 distances, and you'll find the North Star. That's directly north. Right? And so if you ever get lost, you find north at night, and then you can find south, opposite, east, and then west. And then I teach them there's a constellation in the early part of the morning when you can't see the Big Dipper. It's gone down. There's a constellation called Cassiopeia that looks like an odd-shaped M. It's got a triangle going this way and another triangle going this way. If you take the triangle going the opposite direction, it's one triangle going the other direction, you find that constellation, and you point the opposite direction, and that'll point you almost due north. It'll be just to the right of due north. And you can find the North Star. North Star is not the brightest star in the sky, y'all. That's false. But if you can find north, you can find your way home. Listen, y'all. The Bible says the Lord sits in the sides of the north. If you can find north, you can find your way home. You just got to find God. Verse number 33. Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? It sounds like order. If there's ordinances in heaven, if there's rules and there's ways that they have to operate, then there's order. Knowest thou the ordinance of heaven, or canst thou set the dominion thereof in earth? Canst thou lift up thy voice to the clouds, that abundance of waters may cover thee? Canst thou send lightnings? I wish sometimes. That may go and say to thee, here we are. Who hath put wisdom in the inward parts? That's a good question. You know what God asked Job? The thoughts you have on the inside of you, who put that there? The wisdom you have, Job, who put it there? Do you ever think about that? How can we actually have a logical conversation in church, even talking about what we're talking about? How can we communicate so clearly what we're communicating? Does that not even amaze you? You think we're just a body of complex chemicals, just a premortal soup, and a premortal soup can have such incredible thoughts? What is wrong with you? And he's trying to tell him, look, you got all this wisdom. Even your friends over there, they've been coming trying to reason with you. Who even caused these thoughts to be able to be possible? Did you ever think about that, Job? You think Job at 2 years old had those thoughts? Somebody had to cause those. And listen, we have computer systems that store memory. I have a photographic memory, but I ran out of film a long time ago. But who caused us to have even the memory? I'm sitting here talking to people, and as I'm talking to you, you're not only hearing me, but you're also thinking about other things. Isn't that amazing? Does that not even all you? So God is trying to reason with Job here. Look what he says here. Who hath put wisdom in the inward parts? Who hath given understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds in wisdom? What? Try it sometime. I've read through this and I'm like, I ain't even trying that. Look at this. Who can number the clouds in wisdom? Or who can say to the bottles of heaven, when the dust groweth into the hardness and the clods cleave fast together, wilt thou hunt the prey for the lion and fill the appetite for the young lions when they crouch in their dens and abide in the covert to lie in wait? Who provided for the raven his food and when his young ones cry to God and they wonder for lack of meat? And listen, God is just going to go on and on and on with this thought process, and if you read through there, you will be awestruck at how ignorant men are who reject God, because we ain't even caught up with the half. There's a lot of things in there we have discovered in recent years, but we ain't even caught up with the half of what he says there. Isn't that amazing? So what you find here is order in what God creates. Turn over with me. There's no way I can cover all this, but 1 Corinthians 15. God has an amazing order. 1 Corinthians 15. Heaven above, earth below. Isn't it amazing that there's fish, and there's reptiles, and there's birds, and there's beasts of the field. And we're all different, and God creates those beings to master their environment. Short of a flying fish, you would think it weird if a shark was flying in the air, wouldn't you? But God has created the shark to master his environment, which is the water. But you look up at that bird, absolutely, completely different being, and God has allowed him to master his art too. Isn't it amazing? God creates certain beings. You look at the sense of, listen, we have a tendency to think we're the strongest and dominant, and we are. God created us dominant over those beings. But you look at God's order, you know that there are creatures that actually have better eyesight than us. There are creatures that actually have better ability to hear than us. There are creatures that can smell way better than us. And if you don't think so, I'll take you to Alaska and dump you off where there's a bunch of grizzly bears and a bunch of polar bears. And if you think your senses is better, we'll leave you there with nothing but a jacket and some clothes, and you figure it out. So what has God created man with? He tells Job. It's a mind. God has created us with a mind that far exceeds their mind. He's created us in His image. He's created us with the ability to think. And so, though they may destroy some of us, you tell me what would happen. You tell me what would happen if a lion was let loose in Walterboro, South Carolina, and it killed 2 of our kids. Every redneck named Bubba in the county would be hunting a lion. Am I telling it right? Listen, God created us with the ability to dominate, and yet there is part of His creation that has much better senses than us. I think about the bat with that echolocation. I think about dolphins and all this navigation system He built into them. Do you know our boating systems don't even touch the navigation system of a whale or a dolphin? And yet we could dominate over all of them if we wanted to. In fact, we have to have laws to protect them lest we kill them all. God is amazing. I want you to see the order. We're talking about the order of God's creation. Look what He says here in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 39. He says, all flesh is not the same, but there is one kind of flesh of men, and another a flesh of beasts, and another of fishes, another of birds. That's exactly what I'm telling you. He's created all to master their environment. There's an order to it. There are also celestial bodies and terrestrial bodies. Now look, celestial bodies. What is a celestial body? You look up. The heavens declare the glory of God. Terrestrial, that's earthly. Now, I want to go out. Can I go off on a little tangent and just sidetrack for just a minute? Because the Mormons teach that that's 2 different kingdoms. You completely missed what it's talking about. So they have a kingdom that's terrestrial, celestial, and telestial, which don't even exist anywhere in the Bible. So that's not what that's talking about. He's talking about terrestrial bodies, celestial, and then earthly bodies. That's the only 2 mentioned. In fact, he covers, there's order to God, what God creates. Isn't it amazing that when we leave here, because we ignore God, that's how we are. We're hard-headed people that ignore God. And so we insist on going to the moon, and we insist on going to places where God didn't create us to be, right? So you know what happens? These astronauts go up there and they come back. You know what they're depleted of? All kind of vitamins, including calcium and all kind. They have to take all these treatments to get them caught up because they're not in a body where God intended for them to be. What is the point in even going? I'll tell you why men are trying to go out there. It's an attempt to disprove God's existence. You look at it, tell me any other logical reason why we should be there. And you know what happens every time they go attempting to disprove Him? They find more evidence that He is exactly who He said He was. It's amazing. But notice He has an order. And there's no way, I have, 10 or 12 verses left, and I'm just going to have to leave this right here and let you take a further look at it. You read in the Bible all through the Scriptures, God creates things with order. He doesn't create things with disorder. There's an order in the church, there's an order in the home, and there's an order in everything that God creates. Amen? All right, let's take a break right there.